Good afternoon. This afternoon, you have joined the session entitled Leading Engagement, Council Strategies for Engaging Diverse Communities and Backgrounds. This afternoon, you will hear from a diverse panel of speakers who will share information about how they use the values, guiding principles, strategies, and approaches for engaging diverse communities within their councils. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. Tedra Jackson is the Deputy Director of the Michigan Developmental Disabilities Council, with responsibility for overseeing the development and implementation of the 5-year state plan. Additionally, Ms. Jackson supports the Council's Race, Equity, Access, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, facilitates Michigan's Community of Practice on Cultural and Linguistic Competence, and co-leads the Michigan Bridging Disability and Aging Community of Practice. Catherine Stager Wilson is a program coordinator for the Missouri Developmental Disabilities Council with a focus on grassroots advocacy and outreach. She has professionally worked in disability advocacy for over 29 years. Her passion is to encourage others to think differently about disability issues through a disability studies lens, honoring the lived experience of disability when creating social justice and inclusive change. Jackie Hayes is a program planner and diversity and inclusion specialist for the New York State Council on Developmental Disabilities. She coordinates one of the CDD standing committees, the Community and Systems Change Committee. As a diversity and inclusion specialist, she helps embed diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives throughout the agency. She is also the language access coordinator. Miguel Juarez works with the Idaho Council on Developmental Disabilities. Miguel coordinates partners in policymaking, language access, and Latino community and outreach training. Allison White is the executive director of the DC Developmental Disabilities Council, leading grassroots efforts to engage families and advocates in systems and cultural change through policy, advocacy, and program development. McKinley Rouse has been a program officer for the Pennsylvania DD Council since 2019. McKinley has vast experience as a drug and alcohol counselor and with program and facility regulation. And with that, I will turn it over to Tedra Jackson, who will now begin this afternoon's presentation.
Thank you, Carol Ann. Good afternoon, everyone. So hopefully you were here with us for the 1 o'clock session with Tawara. That was fabulous. And so in this second session, we're really going to talk. You're going to hear from several of us that work for councils as we talk about how we are actually working to lead engagement of communities. And I'm going to kick us off with just a brief introduction and foundation, and really helping to establish the why this is important for us as councils. And as always, it's best to begin at the beginning, which for us is the DD Act. Next slide, please. Within the DD Act, there are several terms. There are several terms that are defined for us that really illustrate and really explicitly lay out for us the work that we are supposed to be doing, who we're supposed to be doing it with and for. And so we're going to go quickly through some of those terms just to help with our foundation, and then we'll get into a little bit more about engaging the community. Next slide, please. So accessibility is a term that's been in the DD Act since the beginning. And when the final rule was passed in 2015 or 2014, excuse me, they expanded that definition of accessibility to really include language access. So we don't have a definition of linguistic competency in the DD Act, but it does talk about, in that accessibility definition, that we need plain language in a manner that is accessible and timely to individuals with disabilities, including accessible websites and the individual. This is individuals who are limited English proficiency, and this includes oral interpretation, written translation, and taglines. So any mottos or taglines should be available in non-English languages, indicating the availability of language services. So as we're promoting our programs, we want to make sure that we've got that indication of the availability of language services. Next slide, please. Cultural competence is defined for us. We won't go over that, as Tawara just did a wonderful job of that for us in our last session. The next slide, please. Integration, which is really looking at what's available and helping people exercise, their rights in the community. Next slide, please. Minority participation is defined, and this is really this speaks specifically in regards to the geographic representation of our states, which includes race and ethnicity. Next slide, please. Representation, again, is really important as we're looking at the diversity of the council and the council membership. So while we aren't responsible, we know that the governors do the appointments. Council staff does have a responsibility to recruit and to talk to people, talk to the appointment staff about this requirement and why it's so important that we have that representation of our council members. Next slide, please. Unserved and underserved. And again, you'll see here that this includes racial and ethnic minorities, disadvantaged individuals, people with limited English proficiency, individuals from underserved geographic areas. So this is really rural or urban. You could be underserved and in an urban community. And then this could be specific groups of people within a population. So people with specific developmental disabilities, people who require assistive technology to participate in community life. This would include people who use alternative communication methods. And so as we are talking about engaging with diverse populations, this unserved and underserved is really important in expanding your perspective on who exactly that is. It's not just about race or ethnicity. It really does encompass several other historically marginalized communities that we should all be paying attention to. Next slide, please. And these are just resources where you can find some of you can find these definitions in the DD Act, and then the final rule, which outlines the definitions under the term for accessibility, and in really expanded that limited English proficiency provisions. Next slide, please. So as we're talking about engagement, it's really what's important is it's not what's on the table, it's who's in the chair that matters. And so just like as a disability motto, we've got, we use nothing about us without us. That same mantra or that same perspective applies as we are doing work to really expand who we're working with and who we're working for and who our advocacy will really benefit. Next slide, please. And so one of the things that we want to be really mindful of as we are doing community engagement, and if you were at the session before, Tawara really underscored the differences between community engagement and community outreach. This is this model we use in the Michigan Council as we're talking about community engagement, because it really helps it really helps give a concrete framework for how and who should be invited at the table, invited, excuse me, to the table as we're working to expand our reach within our communities and within the communities in our state. So you want to make sure that there's people that have issue experience. So, that subject matter expertise. You want to make sure that there's demographic relevance. How many people on your team demographically reflect the target population? Look at geographic relevance. How many people on your team grew up in or live in the neighborhood or the city or the township or whatever area it is that you are serving with the initiative? And then looking at direct engagement, and meaning how many people at your table or at the table work directly or indirectly with the target populations. And this model really shows you that the middle, the bullseye, is like the intended beneficiary, the intended group issue, the intended neighborhood. The green or the outer rim is really, those are the people that you want. The green are the folks that as we're assessing who's around the table, that's kind of the gold standard. People who all have personal lived experience with an issue. They, in terms of demographic relevance, they're similar to the target population. They currently live in the target area and directly work with the target population. So if we were putting together the ideal table, you would have the blue, and then the green that's ideally everybody at the table would be in one of those 4 areas. Now, we realizing that that's not always possible, because we're always learning and growing and expanding, meeting new people, learning about new issues. That purple rim, the second layer, is really, in terms of issue experience, are there people who have family or other folks close to them that who have direct experience with the issue? For demographic relevance, looking at people who represent other historically disenfranchised groups. So you might not have people who are exactly in that target. The next best thing is people who are adjacent to the target, to that target group. People who formerly lived in the target area. And so if you've never lived in the area, but if you used to live in the area, that's better than, having someone that never lived in the area and doesn't know that community, maybe at all. And finally, in terms of direct engagement, looking at, they manage people who work in the target area. So maybe, if it's a statewide organization, but it's a group that has local or field offices or field services, where people are dispersed within the community. So that's a better layer than our final layer, which is the white with the dotted line around it, which is really people at a table with no direct life experience. They're not from a historically disenfranchised group, not from or living in the target area, and don't work with the target population. And so as we are, continuing to advocate and continuing to really invite people in or out, this isn't just for council specific things, but if you're sitting around other people's table, if these are the questions that you want to be asking as you're figuring out who should be invited to X, who should be invited to work with us on X issue. It's really important that people from that community are invited in to the table as we are working to advocate on their behalf and, with them. Next slide, please. So we are here. And what does that mean? If you can see this, this is one of my favorite pictures, and I use it a lot, as we're talking about as I'm talking about equity and our cultural competence or linguistic competence. And it really is to illustrate that this work is a journey, and that none of us are at the same point on the journey. So wherever we are, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. So today, as you're listening to some of our other DD Council colleagues who are really working diligently and have worked diligently to make changes in their states and communities, really listen to learn. Don't compare what they're doing to what you're doing. They may have been working for years, and maybe you're just getting started. So it's not, this is for us to help each other. The most important point here that we want to make is this is progress, not perfection. We're all striving to really just do a better job tomorrow than we did yesterday. And so, I'm going to pass it to the first panelist, which is Catherine and Jackie from Missouri and New York. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tedra. Good afternoon. I am Catherine Stager Wilson from the Missouri DD Council. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white woman with dark shoulder length hair, wearing a blue blouse and a black sweater. And I am sitting in front of the MoDDC virtual background. I wanted to share with you all how our council has learned about diverse communities and how that learning has informed our funded projects. Next slide. All right. So a few years ago, our council knew that the Spanish-speaking population in Missouri was growing, and we wondered how we might go about including them in our work. We expected that Spanish-speaking families and people with disabilities were experiencing barriers, but we weren't certain what those barriers were and what would be helpful to them in terms of systemic change. So we decided to create a couple of SEEDS grants to assess what these communities were experiencing and how the council could support them in systemic changes that they would want. So a SEEDS grant is a low-cost grant, and SEEDS is an acronym that stands for Supporting Education and Empowerment to Define Systems Change. We offered SEEDS grants to 3 cultural brokers to inform our council what their communities wanted. The cultural brokers were all 3 parents who had children with developmental disabilities. They all spoke both English and Spanish fluently and were highly respected leaders in their own communities. They carried a lot of trust and rapport with the people that they lived with in their region. So the SEEDS projects were $3,000 each, and they were for 6 to 9 months. And the cultural brokers, they assessed the lived experiences, the barriers and the needs of Spanish-speaking communities in Southwest Missouri. This was in the Springfield area, down in the Ozarks, and then also in the Kansas City area. The grantees chose different ways of collecting the needed information. We left it open to them to collect the information in whatever worked best for their communities. 2 of the 3 grantees used electronic or hard copy surveys. And then the other grantee, they used small group discussions to identify themes, to note the needs and barriers experienced by families. So based upon what we learned from these SEEDS grants, we were able to develop 2 funded grant projects. Next slide, please. The first project we funded was a Partners in Policy Making class in the southwest corner of the state down in the Ozarks. It was entirely done in Spanish. As a result of the SEEDS grants, we learned about cultural barriers to our partners' programming. Spanish-speaking participants did not like traveling alone across the state and leaving their families behind. Years prior, we did have 2 Spanish speakers in our general partners class, and we used interpreters and translators for that work. Generally, our partners classes typically would have about 20 participants in them, but this one class down in the Ozarks was entirely of Spanish speakers, and we had 18 participants in that first class, so it was a huge success. The partners class was actually facilitated by the same cultural broker who did their local SEEDS assessment. And she was a parent of 2 children who had autism. The partners class was hosted within their community, so they didn't have to travel. And we allowed the whole family to attend along with the partners participant. All of the presenters, the subject matter experts, they all spoke Spanish, and all of the information was provided directly in Spanish. The partners graduates called themselves community navigators. They were inclusive leaders within their community for all things, not just disability-related issues. Their general networking, learning, and leadership skills, it all flowed into other aspects of their lives. And so they became the go-to leaders within their communities. Next slide, please. The second project we developed as a result of the SEEDS grant was our Supporting Language Access in Schools project. We learned about the lack of language access in schools and how it impacts education advocacy for students with developmental disabilities. IEPs and education advocacy is hard enough. And if you don't have a quality interpreter, or if nothing is translated in your primary language, it feels impossible to advocate for the services that you want and need. Our Supporting Language Access in Schools project is providing training to school districts and school professionals about their legal obligations to language access and how to provide quality language access. We're also training Spanish-speaking grassroots advocacy groups about their language access rights in special education. It's a train the trainer project. The grassroots families and students are being trained to be the experts to teach school districts and other families about the importance of language access rights and responsibilities. 2 of the SEEDS grants recipients are the support staff and educators for the grassroots families and students with disabilities, who will eventually be the trainers to sustain this project. Okay, so now I'm going to hand it over to Jackie.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. And it's so exciting to hear about the projects that are happening in Missouri. And I just wanted to say thank you to the other members of the DICLC and E work group, and also to Tawar and the excellent session that we had before. You know, our council has definitely been so strongly influenced by the work of Georgetown and the National Center for Cultural Competence. So I'm Jackie Hayes. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a white woman with dark glasses and brown hair. I'm wearing a white and blue striped collar shirt, and I'm sitting in front of a bookshelf. And so I'm going to share today a little bit about our strategies for engaging diverse communities by focusing on an example of new Americans in our state with developmental disabilities. And so, you know, in kind of reflecting back on the work and that we've done, I saw it in kind of these phases. There was a research and listening phase, where an engagement phase, relationship building, and then investment. And I will say it's not always linear. It didn't always happen like exactly like, okay, 1, then 2. It really is like an iterative approach where as you learn more, you kind of reshape and rethink how you might be doing things. And I think they build into new or different initiatives. And you can go to the next slide. So in terms of new Americans, New York State is an incredibly racially, ethnically, culturally and linguistically diverse state. So we did have to look at, kind of Tora had prompted that, like, have you looked at the census data of your state? Have you looked at who makes up the communities in your state? So really that was the starting point. And New York is the third highest linguistically diverse state in the country. But New York also, not only does it have a high number of people who speak English as a second language, but it also has a very high diversity of languages spoken. There was a really cool New York Times article that was done where they were talking about these researchers looking at endangered languages, and they actually came across over 700 languages in New York City alone. So our state is incredibly linguistically diverse. But I think in doing some of the research in partnership with communities and with the Office for New Americans, we heard similar issues that I think, Catherine, your state had identified as well. There was a lot of issues with parents or family members having information translated into their language, being provided language access services. People talk a lot about stigma too, depending on the country that they come from. There might be different ideas and concepts of disability. Depending on where they're migrating from, there might not be a similar system. There may not have been disability services in the country that they came from. And so even the thought that those resources would exist might be a difficult one, or, they may have had negative experiences in their home country with the government. And so there might be a fear and a hesitancy to reach out to state agencies or government agencies or even advocate. So those were some of the things that we had learned, I think through a community needs assessment. And then we also partnered with the Office for New Americans. And I do want to give them a plug. In New York, we are very lucky to have this office. And it's not, the Office for New Americans wasn't a disability focused office. It's an office that really was set up, to serve new Americans in our state and offers a number of free services like English language classes, connection to interpretation services, immigration legal support, and a number of other things. So they were kind of a natural partner for the work. And there's actually, I can post in the chat a link of, if you want to see in your state, if there's a Office of Language Access an Office of New Americans, in case you'd be interested in partnering with them in your state. But there are other states, I think there's over 12 now, states that have Office for New Americans, in case you're interested in that partnership. But we really work with them too, to gain a better understanding of the needs of new Americans in our state. All right, so you can go to the next slide, and I'll talk through kind of the other components of it as we go. So one of the grants that we did and are currently still engaged in, again, is in partnership with the Office for New Americans, and it's called the Ramirez June Developmental Disabilities Navigator Initiative. We had heard from families that there was a lot of challenges with navigating services and having someone that kind of helps connect them to, an understanding about the resources in New York State, but also has that understanding of their cultural background and, their language. So ONA really has been an excellent partner for us, and we've done a 5-year grant with them that started in 2019. And, I think the investment piece was really important, doing projects and investing money to address some of the problems and issues and needs that came up in research and focus groups. And so you can go to the next slide. So some of the things that we learned about New Americans, again, in our connections with the Office for New Americans, is that actually 1 in 4 New Yorkers are New Americans, and they define New Americans as people who were born outside the United States, but who live in the United States. And it's a really diverse group. So that can include refugees and immigrants, people who are seeking asylum status. That can be naturalized citizens. It could also be someone who's undocumented. So there's a wide range and diversity of New Americans who live in New York State. And you can go to the next slide. The other thing I think, that was really important for us to learn from the Office for New Americans and from our experience in partnership with them is that New American families really can include people who are both born outside of the United States and US citizens. So a lot of the families that make up New American families in New York State are mixed status families, where maybe it was a parent that migrated and then their children were born in the United States. So 90% of children in mixed status families are born in the United States, also referred to as, second generation. But I think it's really important because again, that understanding of New American families may mean that maybe the child, due to their immigration status or citizenship, has access to some services, but maybe the parents may be hesitant, or maybe they need to be connected with immigration lawyers or support if there's some fear or hesitancy around that area. But important to understand, the diversity of New American families in our state. And you can go to the next slide. So some of the things that they shared with us and that we've learned through our partnership with the Office for New Americans is, they did a final report, and the link will be in the slide, but they identified language access barriers, again, not having materials translated into their primary language, not being connected with interpreters. They also shared that New American families often don't know what resources and services are available. And a lot of times that does have to do with maybe the country that they were migrating from. There may not have been a similar system of disability services, or maybe those were negatively viewed, or people had bad experiences with those systems. So they may not have a reference or, point for that. And it's important to, I think, have cultural brokers and trusted partners really share about the resources and services that are available with that understanding. A lot of the resources that are available, they found not to be very accessible to them. So not in their native language, not in plain language, hard to understand. And then the agencies that do provide services, once someone received eligibility for services, they might have a limited capacity to support New Americans. So really wanting to build, staff capacity to support New Americans with developmental disabilities. Difficulty enrolling in developmental disability services. So that was one of the challenges that we've learned through this grant as well. If someone went to school or in another country, they might not have an established and documented disability, which is one of the key things that's needed for our eligibility for disability services. And so that lack of documentation, or maybe someone did have the documentation, but they're fleeing war or a really difficult situation in their home country, and they don't have those documents anymore. They were lost, or it'd be very difficult to track them down. And so that's something that, our partnership with the Office for New Americans has really helped us learn more about in those challenges. I will say one of the keys to this has been including the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities in our partnership with ONA and with this grant, so that as these systemic barriers come up, we can try to work with OPWDD or our DD service provider and see if there's ways to address those gaps or those needs or those systemic barriers. We learned that enhanced support is really needed for New Americans to access services. So I think from that equity lens, it's, they're making sure that there's more resources, support for New Americans, because that is needed. Also facing discrimination and bias. We heard that a lot around the language access piece, kind of attitudes that people should learn English, which is, incredibly difficult to do. And I think a lot of us would have a lot of challenges later in life learning a second language. But some of those attitudes that they faced when trying to navigate service system, and just the difficulty of the service system. So it was really helpful, I think, for our partnership with ONA also to help us identify some of these barriers. One of the projects that kind of came out of hearing about these barriers as well, and you can go to the next slide. We partnered with our DD service provider agency, the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities, because one of the things that we heard was that when people were trying to access, the first step to eligibility for services in New York State is the front door. And people talked about, kind of community members shared front door sessions not being in their native language or having challenges with getting that those front door sessions, again, interpreted and in ways that are easy to understand. So we did a 2.5-year grant with the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities. They partnered with a minority and women-owned business vendor who worked with 2 community-based organizations, multicultural agencies in our state, Synergia and the Chinese American Planning Council. And they talked with community members directly, and community members shared with them, Spanish speakers and the Chinese American community, that they really needed these front door session modules broken down into 10 short, easy to understand videos, and that those videos should be in Spanish and in Mandarin. So they started with those. And so our grant funded those 10 modules. And OPWD is hoping to sustain this by making these available in other languages. So those are 2 projects that we worked on. There's still a lot more work to do. And I really, think that long-term commitment is so important when it comes to engaging with diverse communities, that it's not just a one and done, that you really are, as you learn about new barriers and new issues, continuing to kind of pilot new programs to try to address those. And then you can go to the next slide. Finally, I just wanted to share actually a video. We're starting to do a video to highlight our grant with the Office for New Americans, and we got 2 clips. One is from our council member, Bin Fang. He's a member of our council. And then the second story that's going to be shared is Monica and Berto Ramirez. They're one of the families that inspired the Ramirez June Developmental Disabilities Navigator Initiative. And I want to give a shout out to Kay Broughton and our staff who helped put this clip together. So thank you. Oh, I can't hear the audio.
I also don't hear audio.
Sorry, everyone. Let me work on the audio real quick.
Amy, when you go to click share screen, in the bottom right corner, there's layouts and options, and you want to click share with sound.
This is my 33 years in America. I grew up in China. When I was young, like 20 something, I feel very disappointed with the future there. So I got a scholarship in America, one of the college. After finished, I got a job. Then we changed my student visa to the working visa, then going to green card. Then year 2008, me and my wife became the citizen. So I'm just like a very typical immigrant family until we have our own first child, which is Vincent, is my son. After his diagnosis as autism, because that time is like a year 2000. That time, actually, me and my wife planned to go back to China. I remember that's the first concern we tried to understand is if my son go back to China, what kind of service got it? So when we went to Shanghai, which is the largest city in China, we find out the leading expert on the autism. And we talked to the doctor, said, hey, look, my son have autism, we think about to go back to China. Then she asked us, why you guys come back? Because in China have nothing about autism. Even herself is just come back from the United States, get her first training on autism. She said, I'm the leading expert. Look at, I have it. Why you take it back? I said, oh, that's not the way I... So we decided to stay in the United States, raise my kids, and this is the best decision I have made.
I remember the time when my father passed away and I had to become legal guardian of Humberto. And at the same time, I got hit by a tractor trailer. So it was a very tough moment. That was when I reached out to Laura, and Cynthia was there on the phone with me. So she really helped us a lot in being able to have a place to live and being able to get self-direction from Humberto so he can be more productive in the community and not just stay home. Humberto likes reading, bowling, dancing. He is taking lots of classes, like cooking classes. For people who are new to the States like I was, it's hard to find services. You don't know like who to talk to, where to go to. And when you have somebody with special needs, you kind of like feel alone. That, you know, like what else can you do? It's hard to balance work with your sleep and at the same time trying to help them. So I believe that it's very important to have these services that can help individuals like Humberto. For the other Trique communities that are out there, I would like to tell them that the United States is a place full of opportunities. You're not alone. There's lots of resources, people who are very knowledgeable in the areas, whether that is like speech therapy, physical therapy, you name it. Those resources are out there. It's just a matter of like making the time and effort to get them. I know a lot of people think that the paperwork is stressful, but it's worth it to go through the process because it makes a big change in the individual's life. As you can see right here, Humberto is very engaged in the community. If we did it, you can do it too. Definitely do it because special people like him are worth it.
Great, thanks so much. It's wonderful to hear their stories, and hopefully we'll have a finished video on the Ona Ramirez June initiative too that we can share out. But I will pass it to Carol Ann next.
Thank you. Is there anything else our panelists would like to add at this time? If not, we will look forward to hearing from Miguel Juarez at this time.
Thank you, Carol. Hello, everyone. My name is Miguel Juarez. I am with the Idaho Council on Developmental Disabilities, and I am a mid-30s Latino male with dark complexion and black hair. And today, I'm going to present to you some information on how Idaho has been working with our diverse communities. Next, please. So the Idaho Council on Developmental Disabilities was able to identify a target disparity, which identified that the Latino community is an unserved community, has been an unserved community in the state of Idaho. So taking that into consideration, about 10 years ago, the council decided to take action and add that to the work plan and has been designating funding to that specific disparity in our state. some of the work that has been done is having cultural brokers from the Latino community assist the council and advise the council on the best ways to connect with the Latino community. Those cultural brokers um, work on connecting the council with community members that could advise the council and share their lived experiences, share their experiences working with the Latino community and helping the council identify which areas were the most in which this community needed the most support. And this has been going on for about 10 years, this process. It has not been an easy process. There was a lot to learn through this process for the DD Council, particularly because for quite a while we did have participants from the Latino community get involved and share their, as I said, their experiences and help us understand what was missing. But it was difficult it has been difficult for the council to continue having them engaged and involved, and it took us it's quite some time to really understand how to go about connecting with these communities and really getting them involved and getting them to be part of the work. Next slide, please. And so we were able to identify all the challenges that these communities had and how these challenges were obstructing that change or that involvement to happen. And the challenges that we faced were mainly those of language barriers. Now, for members of the Latino community not being able to speak speak English, or some of the families are families in which are different generations, are formed by different generations. Some members speak the language, others don't speak the language, so the information is not available for those families. The DD Council had been doing all the necessary work to provide interpretation and translation, and we were including them into our major programs like Partners in Policymaking and providing interpretation and translation as well. But still, it was being it was complicated to really get members from this community to continue that involvement. And another challenge that this community was facing, or is still facing, is accessing resources. Many of the families are not part of the system. Many families with a person with a disability in the Latino community have no access to services because some of them might not have been enrolled in Medicaid for disability, to receive disability services. So they are probably not receiving those services if they're not part of the system. If they don't know how to access the system, then that was some of the challenges that we were have identified through these years. And that there's no information in their native language. If there's no information that has been put out there for those families, how are they going to be involved? How are they going to reach out for help? Or how are they going to find out what the steps are to receive those services and be part of that system? So that systematic exclusion that exists through, until now, was we were, as a council, we were able to recognize all of these challenges and think on better strategies, and still working with those members of the community to try to understand how to best reach this community, and in providing the correct information, and so we found that there is inequities that prevent families from participating, inequities in social inequities, families that are farm workers that are not have no access or cannot afford to miss a day of work to participate in a meeting, or families that don't drive. There are many situations, different situations that prevent families from being involved. And with the help of members of the community, we're able to really understand what the issues were, and that's how we next slide please. We started to work on making changes based on that. The strategies that we used, the first one is an asset-based community involvement strategy, and we use this by going directly to communities with the guidance of people that are part of the community, like myself. The council invested and planned for a position like mine to open, and I am a qualified, certified interpreter. I'm able to guide the council's work in language access that way. But we also had members from the Latino community that we have been working with for those many years, that were able to guide us and come with us to do outreach work in directly in the communities and talk directly to the people and hear from them to plan and to identify what the council needs to do to inform other agencies, to inform the health and welfare, to make those changes or work on creating those changes. The first thing that we learned is that you have to gain the trust of the Latino community. If there's no trust, then there's no entrance into that community. You may have the best intentions, you may have all the resources and all the information, but if there is no trust that is built, if there is not built trust within that, between the community and the council, then there is no connection. So we heard from from members of the community. In this case, we have 3 council members that are from the Latino community, and they were crucial for the council for us to be able to move that work forward. Their involvement going with us to these communities and talking directly to members in those communities helped us tremendously. We were able to involve leaders from these communities so that these leaders, leaders from the Latino community that know which events are successful, which places the people gather on the weekends, where to offer specific resources, where to offer specific information or training, what are the best venues or meeting spaces for this community, things like bringing food to offer at meetings, providing childcare, all of these important aspects that are part of the Latino community helped us in the way, help us to be better prepared at getting them involved. The involvement from Latino-led organizations was also very important. We connected with organizations that are, we currently are focusing on a specific area in the state of Idaho. So Latino-led organizations, we work with Latino-led organizations that are working in that specific area, that have identified the the lack of resources, that have identified the issues that these communities have, that know the communities very well because they're already doing some kind of the work there. So it made it easier for us to come in and work with these organizations along with the community leaders and teaming up with our council members. And that way, we were able to enter this new community, and we were able to bring that information and make them slowly get them involved and make them part of our work. So now we are at a point in which we are developing leadership from that group of people that we have been working with. We have identified some of them to be part of other programs like Partners in Policy Making. We have another program, another leadership program called Lideramos Juntos. Together we lead, that the intent of this program is, and the intent of the council for having this, offering this program in this area, is to develop leaders in that community, in that area, that are going to lead and are going to bring others with them, and so that they can get involved, so that they can know how the system works, and that so that they can use their skills and use them with other members of the community, and just develop that leadership and have leaders, and so that the council doesn't come and try to offer things. So now how things are going to work is that those leaders are going to talk to the council, are going to come to us, and are going to be hopefully in the future becoming council members or getting involved in other disability organizations, and they are the ones who are going to drive drive the needs of the community and request the services that they need based on what they're lacking, on what the community is lacking resource wise. And so this is a very an outstanding outcome from that work, because we hear directly from community members instead of trying to guess what the community needs. And we also focus mainly, as I was saying, on delivering anything with cultural sensitivity. So we make sure that everything that we offer is cultural competent. We provide, as I said, translation, interpretation. We provide information completely in Spanish, directly from Spanish speakers that are from the community, that understand that community, that understand the structure of the family, the structure of the community, and that way we are able to be successful providing the support for them to advocate for a whole community. And did I have another slide? I don't remember, I'm sorry. No, that was it. So thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison White. I'm with the Developmental Disabilities Council for DC. And I want to thank all the previous speakers. I am loving hearing about all this amazing work, and I'm getting great ideas from everybody. So I'm going to talk a little bit about DC's Latina community and Ethiopian and Eritrean community engagement. And I have a little star here by Latina, just to say that we've had lots of conversations in DC, and I'm sure many of you all have as well, about what word to use when we're even just talking about the title of the conference that I'm going to tell you about. So over the years, we've called it the Latino Conference on Disabilities, the Latinx Conference on Disabilities. The idea behind trying to find the right term is finding something that's respectful, but understood by the whole community, and also thinking about evolution toward more gender neutral language, trying to find the right word. So Latina is a term that has evolved by trying to acknowledge the Spanish language nuances and use a term that actually is easy to pronounce in Spanish. But there's a star there because there's not universal agreement. At least we haven't found universal agreement even in our work over the years on the right term. So there's just a caveat there. I'll do a quick visual description. Also, my pronouns are she, her, or ella in Spanish. I'm a white woman. I'm wearing my silver headphones today to try to block out background noise. I have long brown hair and I have a background that was designed by my colleague, Kevin Wright. It's a blurry, bright office background and it has our DC Developmental Disabilities Council logo in the upper corner. I also will share on this front slide here, we have a picture from our very first conference on disabilities back in 2019. And this picture includes some of our speakers, some of the conference planners, some of our conference attendees, and everybody. It was a great day, a great launch to our ongoing engagement with the Latinx community. And so I wanted to share some of that. We can go to the next slide. So who am I? I just wanted to share a little bit more about myself. I'm the director of our council. I'm a macro social worker by training and background. I am a sibling and caregiver of a person with a disability. My older sister just moved to DC to live with me last summer. We're coming up on almost a year of living together again. And I am a lover of change, of dogs, of learning, and of cultural sharing. And I have a couple pictures here. One is me and my sister soon after she moved to DC. There was a beautiful rainbow outside. And so we walked outside to take a picture. And then another picture is me at our recent Developmental Disabilities Awareness Month talent show and dance party. And I am wearing a green feather dress. So I put this slide in here intentionally because part of our work on community engagement is to try to create opportunities for people to share themselves with us and for us to share ourselves with the community. And we believe in trying to create space for people to come bring their whole selves and to be who they are, and to love and accept the whole community as they are. So I wanted to try to model that a little bit here. Every planning meeting that we have for the Latinx conference that I'll talk about, we always start the meeting with a little bit of sharing about who's in the room, share a fun fact, something like that. So we really try to get to know each other, and that's part of the trust building and the relationship building. You can go to the next slide. So for our strategies, a lot of this, as we've gone throughout the day, a lot of this has already been shared. And so it's both affirming for us, I think, to hear that other people are doing similar things. It feels like we're kind of on the right track. And also it has helped me learn because everyone's doing it a little bit differently. So that's really exciting to think about also. And like Jackie said, I have these listed 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's not, these don't happen in order necessarily. Sometimes you spend more time focusing on one than the other. And sometimes if I gave this presentation again next year, I might add a different strategy that we learned throughout the year. So building capacity for relationships, like I said, a lot of that is about being vulnerable, all of us being willing to be vulnerable and share parts of ourselves, and being willing to be wrong and learn from the community. So that has really helped us with building our relationships. The kind of a quick story that one of the pictures on this slide the top one is the MC from our conference last year, Angela Gonzalez, and she is standing with Yanira, who was our keynote speaker. And Angela and Yanira spent a lot of time, even outside of work hours, just getting to know each other so they could, have a good stage presence while they were at the conference, and so that we could build that relationship. And Yanira has since told us, I want to be part of your group. Like, I want to be part of the planning for this next year. So, so that spending that time was really important for relationship building. Investing money and time. Again, you have to put your money where your mouth is. Proactively learning and changing. There's a lot of learning we can do through research, like looking at data, looking at information from reports or census data, but also, like Miguel said, I loved what you said, we don't need to be guessing what the community needs. We have to listen to the community. So, proactively doing our own learning, but also being willing to change when the community tells us what the community is interested in, and committing to the long haul, always really important. That was something Tawara talked about as well. I have a couple other pictures here from other conference. They're all from our Latin Conference on Disabilities. They're conference participants and attendees, also some of our partners, and everyone's smiling and happy because we all really love doing this work, and we always try to build some fun into the conference. This year, we're one of the pieces we're planning. We've always had a resource fair where we invite organizations to come share information. And this year we're calling it a resource and fun fair, because we want to make sure we're building in fun things. Like last year we had face painting, and we're talking about a photo booth and things like that that are really meaningful. You can go to the next slide. Building capacity for relationships. So I think a lot of this is similar to what Miguel was sharing, having people on staff who are native speakers of the language of the community you're trying to connect with. So in DC, since 2019, since we started trying to engage a lot more with the Latin community, I've hired 2 native Spanish speakers on staff. We're a staff of 5. And our public health worker, who we have this year through that public health funding grant, is also a Spanish speaker, and I call myself a half of a Spanish speaker. So, and we're always trying to keep that learning going with other communities that we engage with. We have also since appointed 3 Latin Spanish speakers to the council. Our council size, we have 23 people on our council. So we've got 3, as of right now, 3 native Spanish speakers. I believe we have 1 or 2 vacancies coming up. And throughout the years, we've built these relationships with people who've become interested in us. So we're confident that we can keep that representation going. We created Vamos DC, that's the name of our group. So back in 2019, when we first came together to plan our very first Latin Conference on Disabilities, it was a smaller group of people. And over time, we've grown to over 15 different entities. Some are organizations, some are community members that have wanted to join. And so we decided we needed to call ourselves something. We needed a formal name. So we landed on Vamos DC. So now everything we do where we're engaging our Spanish speaking community, we connect with Vamos DC. We also have started building more relationships and engagement with our Ethiopian and Eritrean community. DC has a large Ethiopian and Eritrean immigrant population. And so we've been trying to use what we've learned with Vamos DC and do similar work with the Ethiopian and Eritrean special needs community, which is the name Ethiopian and Eritrean special needs community is the name of a nonprofit organization. And we have been regularly checking in with their director to continue engagement with them and started some funding engagements with them. Next slide. So investing money and time, I wanted to put some numbers out here. In the last 2 years, we've awarded $75,000 to projects supporting the Latinx community and $57,000 to projects supporting the Ethiopian and Eritrean community. We always try to make sure we have equal access to information by prioritizing providing information in a community's native language rather than through translation only. So we also make sure to have a line item in our budget always for interpretation and translation, because sometimes that's what we need to do. But we have learned that it's the information, receiving information, understanding it, being able to use information, it's much better when it's provided by a native speaker directly, rather than through translation. Things get lost in translation. At the very beginning of the first session today, right after 1 o'clock, when my colleague Luce did a welcome in Spanish, you could see some of the panic arising in the chat of like not being able to access the translation. So, you know, imagine that happening all the time. So we do try to prioritize having that information directly. So like at our resource fair for the Latinx conference, we always tell organizations, bring materials in Spanish or get them translated before you come. Next slide. Proactively learning and changing. Every year with our Latinx conference, we have a listening session. We record everything that people say and we try to act on it. We also did a session for DD Awareness Month last year. I'm losing time a little bit. It might have been 2 years ago. We had it all in Amharic. So we did something similar with the Ethiopian Eritrean community. We had it in Amharic, Tigrinya, and English, translated into English from Amharic. And so having those listening sessions has been an important way for us to learn. And one example of how we have tried to act on that, at the very first conference, the community was very clear that there weren't enough direct care workers that spoke Spanish. I know that we are dealing with that probably all over the country with the direct care workforce crisis. So we supported a direct support professional academy in Spanish. We supported that with funding. A different organization actually runs the DSP Academy in DC. And so we provided funding for them to do one in Spanish and get some additional DSPs who could speak Spanish. And we are very lucky in DC to have an Office of Racial Equity, and we take all of the trainings that they have to offer and are always trying to continue learning. Next slide. I think this is my last slide. So committing to the long haul, this is absolutely necessary for trust building. So we came out in 2019 and said, we're here for the long haul. Like we want to keep engaging and doing this work for many, many years. But the only way that we can really prove that is by continuing to show up and do it. So we're entering our 6th year of having our annual Latinx Conference on Disabilities, and it's grown every year. Our turnout has improved every year. And we want to keep doing that with additional communities. DC is a very diverse place. So we look forward to continuing our engagement with lots of communities. And yeah, the last thing I'll say, the change that we all want to see, it doesn't happen in 5 years. So that's why the long haul is really necessary. And And I just want to thank everybody for being here and having this time dedicated to this topic. It's been great.
Thank you. Does anybody from the panel have anything else to add? If not, I'll turn it over to McKinley Rouse at this time.
Hello, everyone. My name is McKinley Rouse. I'm with the Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council. I'm a Black man. I'm wearing a white shirt. I'm wearing a headset and I'm wearing glasses. My background is brown, and we have the Pennsylvania Development Disabilities logo in the background. Next slide, please. Disparate impact groups. The Pennsylvania Development Disabilities Council requires all applicants for our RFA grants to pick a disparate impact group. RFA stands for Request for Applications. With these applications, we're asking for a specific type of work. These are the majority of our grants. We do not require the applicants for community grants to choose a disparate impact group. Community grants are our small grants of $20,000 or less. Under the mandatory application procedures, we write that failure to include a disparate impact group will result in automatic disqualification. The application won't be reviewed if this is missing. Under the mandatory content requirements, we explain what we mean by disparate impact groups. The council requires all grantees to recognize, describe, and take active measures to lessen the disparate impact experienced by certain groups on the basis of race, ethnicity, economic status, age, gender identity, sexual orientation, geography, or disability or diversity. We ask that you consider which groups experience disparate impact. Tell us how you determine the disparate impact, and specifically how you intend to alleviate the disparity within this particular subset of individuals with developmental disabilities and their families. This can be a subset of the people the grantee is working with, does not have to be the sole focus. For example, you could have a grant where the focus of the work was on people with developmental disabilities in rural areas, where that group was the sole focus of the work. You could also have a grant where the work included people with developmental disabilities in both urban and rural areas. But the people in the rural areas were the disparate impact group. Grantees will sometimes have multiple disparate impact groups. Next slide, please. We consider the disparate impact group when we're scoring applications. We don't want the disparate impact group to be generically people with disabilities or people with developmental disabilities. It should be something more specific than that. It can be people with developmental disabilities who are disparately impacted based on intersectionality not related to disability, or it can be people with developmental disabilities who are disparately impacted based on their specific disability or disabilities. Applications that are too generic here are likely to be scored very low. Sometimes staff and council can become very excited about suggested work with a disparate impact group. This can really boost an application. We review the grantee's work with its chosen disparate impact group when we check our quarterly reports. This obviously varies depending on where the grantee is in their work. For example, some grantees may not be working with their disparate impact group during the planning phases of the work, although other grantees could be working with their disparate impact group during that part of the grant. Sometimes they include members of the disparate impact group on their advisory committees, and this might be done because those people have an insight into reaching that group. Examples of some of the groups that we've reached out to, and there's actually a mistake on this slide. It's my fault for my ADD. It should say Cross Systems Navigator, not Cross Disability Navigator. We had actually had both those grants, but this one was actually the Cross Systems Navigator. And for the Cross Systems Navigator, we're working with immigrants and refugees with developmental disabilities and their families. We work with the immigrants in navigating the various human service systems. These people were particularly disadvantaged due to language and cultural barriers. This includes different and often worse stigma around disabilities and great differences in the health and human services of the immigrants and refugees' home countries. We created primers to help the Health and Human Service agencies serving these populations better understand their cultures and know how to reach out to them. Our grantee did advocacy on behalf of the immigrants with service providers and schools, but also train the immigrants on how to advocate for themselves with these institutions. And we also had a grant with, actually, it's a current grant, Universal Design, and the Disparate Impact Group here are people with development disabilities in urban areas who are food insecure, people of color, and the elderly. I shared a video with my Universal Design grantees about similar Universal Design work that was being done with Native Americans. It was urban farming and gardening that focused on making farms, gardens accessible to everyone, and it was designed to help food insecure people. Another grant, my Preschool to Prison Pipeline, they translated their our satisfaction survey into Chinese because they have a Chinese provider they're dealing with. Now, Black and Brown children with development disabilities are their primary focus, but they had the opportunity to expand there, so they took it. Also, our Authentic Friendships grantee is working with non-traditional communicators, and this includes people who use various technologies to communicate. On our community connections, reaching disparate impact groups, in February of this year, we invited our grantees to a meeting to discuss their work with specific disparate impact groups. Grantees, council members, and staff were grouped together in breakout rooms. The grantees discussed their work reaching out to disparate impact groups and shared about the successes and struggles in reaching those groups. The grantees were able to share with each other and staff, and council members were able to offer suggestions about how to reach out to various groups. In my breakout room, a council member who was deaf talked about how to reach out to the deaf community. One of our grantees shared about their outreach to the Latin community. We're going to be holding a similar meeting with our grantees in the future to continue sharing with each other and learning from each other about reaching various groups. Okay, and that's it for Pennsylvania. Now I'll turn things over to to the next speaker, Catherine Steiger Wilson.
Thank you so much, McKinley. So this is Catherine again from Missouri, and our council calls our RFA grants NOFAs, and NOFA stands for Notice of Funding Available. When we were in the process of updating our NOFA procedures a couple of years ago, we learned about the great work that Pennsylvania was doing, and we were impressed with the work, and so we decided to replicate their idea. We know that people with disabilities experience additional marginalization as a result of their multiple identities. And we thought this was a great way for grantees to think more inclusively and a way to have them reach out to communities that are unserved or underserved and experiencing disparities. So we have a NOFA application requirement as well for grantees to explain how their proposed project will address a similar disparity of another marginalized group. So one example is our Supporting Language Access in Schools project I spoke about earlier. The focus of that project is to provide training to school districts and school professionals about their legal obligations to language access. And this is for families and students with developmental disabilities that speak Spanish. But because of the new NOFA requirement, the grantee's doing this for not only Spanish-speaking families with disabilities, but also families who speak the other 4 top languages in Missouri. And then another example is our Sexuality Education Project. The grantee is one of our state independent living centers, and they're not only providing sexuality education to people with disabilities, but also providing training to people with developmental disabilities who identify as LGBTQ. The LGBTQ community is another group that hasn't had the opportunity to receive quality sexuality education. So with this new requirement, we're really excited about increasing the diverse communities that we're working with while developing opportunities for more collaborative, stronger advocacy for systemic change. And now I'm going to pass it over to Jackie.
Great. Thanks so much, Catherine. I'll try to keep this short because I know we're running a little tight on time. But one example I'll just share about council membership, and this is an some internal activities that we've done in order to engage diverse communities to make our council membership more accessible to more people. And so One of the things that we've done is, translate our membership application into the top 12 languages. But I will say that that is kind of a first step, and really only it has to go hand in hand with really outreach and engagement, so that people know that the application is available and they know about our council, who we are and what we do. So we also have a cultural competency work group, a standing one that's been in place for 7 years, and that really has been a springboard to diversify our council membership. Building connections with organizations that serve diverse communities so that we can recruit from a diverse network is also really important in order to increase the diversity of our council membership. But I think, as many other speakers have said, it takes time and really a sustained commitment. You could go to the next slide. With our grantees, just one example, or a few examples of, engaging diverse communities through our grantees is really doing grants that are focused on issues that are important to diverse communities, like the Ona Ramirez June initiative that I mentioned earlier. Grants for grassroots organizations that are run and led by diverse communities. A lot of times those are smaller grants. They tend to be more accessible to community-based or grassroots organizations. So we've done a growing advocacy grant, which is a $10,000 or less grant. Building language into RFPs, contracts, and work plans. Both of my colleagues shared about that earlier in their slides. And, I think I've already learned from them some really excellent language that can be built into our RFPs and contracts potentially in the future. And then offering technical assistance to our grantees on diversifying their networks. And with that, I will pass it to Miguel.
Thank you, Jackie. This is Miguel again. Something that is fun to talk about is the results, the things that we've seen, the outcomes that we've seen after all this work that we have been focusing on for so many years. And so we have, for the DD Council, one of the assets, the best assets is having council members that are from the Latino community, so that they guide us with their own lived experiences. And so we have our first non-English speaker council member. Her name is Maria. And Maria, we use interpreters that are qualified interpreters. We use interpreters that are able to keep up with the kind of language that we use as a state government organization, and working with other organizations, working with language related to disabilities and services and systems. And we also have our first Latina Vice Council Chair. Her name is Marilu Moreno, and she has also been very instrumental in providing guidance to not just to the council, but to other organizations on how to best address the needs that the Latino community in Idaho has. We held our first Spanish conference that was held in June 2023. So for this conference, we offered things like childcare with with the providers that are from the community that speak Spanish. We had this conference offered. We brought speakers from California that were from the community, also everything presented in Spanish. We invited organizations and agencies to bring information to these families only if they had it available in Spanish, and they must have they had to send a representative from their organization that was Spanish speaking, so that they can communicate and provide that information to the participants in the conference. The conference, it was the first time the council was offering this conference. It was a success. Families came in and they were hungry for more information. As a result of that conference, we were able to continue working with members of that community and continue the work in that area and establish those relationships with the community. Then from participants of that conference, we recruited people to be part of our first Partners in Policymaking program in its Spanish version for Lideramos Juntos. We have 7 participants for the state of Idaho. We are doing this in collaboration with the state of Utah. Utah has 8 participants, and we are in our second session. We had our second session in April. We're going to have 5 sessions every other month, and we have a group of leaders that are already looking forward and are already planning to be part of boards and hopefully eventually be willing to be ready to apply for council membership. Next slide, please. And finally, future plans. As I was saying, prepare family members and advocates to apply for council membership. And we, with all the training and all the leadership that these families are developing, these parents and individuals are developing, we hope that they are ready to come in and be part of the council and or represent the community in other boards or other organizations. We encourage family members from this community to get involved and do anything that advocates for the community. Like I said, we have individuals that are very motivated and ready to take on leadership. We will have graduation of the program in September, and they are going to be in charge of organizing future conferences as part of their leadership, as a part of the results from their leadership. So yes, that's all I have. Thank you all very much for your attention today.
Amy, there's a question in the chat box for the panelists. How did you actually choose the specific demographic, linguistic, the group of focus to give your focus to? What was your process?
This is Allison. Oh, go ahead, Miguel.
No, very quickly. This is very easy for Idaho. Idaho is the highest has the highest numbers on the Hispanic Latino population. So that was identified as one of our I'm forgetting the term, targeted disparities, and that's how we chose to serve this community in particular.
This is Allison. Yeah, we looked at data, and 11% of the population in DC identified as Hispanic. But also, I want to say we also were already connected with some Spanish-speaking groups, and just within our partners already, like our partners with our state DD agency, within like our existing group, we had a lot of Spanish speakers. And so it felt like an easy place to start also. And I really appreciated what Tedra said at the very beginning about like this, we're all learning here. We're all doing the best we can. And as we learn more, we do more, or we do things differently. So I always think starting with what feels most accessible, start somewhere. It's always okay to do that.
One thing I'll say for us, and in our application, we basically they have to convince us as far as the disparate impact group. Like they have to, part of what the application, not some convince us, but part of the application is them explaining why is this a disparate impact group. They explain to us, how is this group marginalized? So that's part of how we look at it. as far as with the work we do with our grantees and everything. They have to explain, okay, why is this group, how are they marginalized? What's going on with them and everything. So, and that's part of how we judge them whenever we're looking at the applications and everything.
Yeah, I can add that in New York, we looked at data as well. And I think, to your point, Allison, we also looked at organizations that we could partner with and really like collaborate with. And so that also I think was a piece of the puzzle. But I think there's like you said, because sometimes I remember when I first started my position, I felt really overwhelmed. Like there's so much need and there's so much work we need to do. Like where should we begin? But I think starting somewhere and seeing who you can partner with is a really good approach.